Hey everyone. My name is Dr. Effie Habsha and I'm welcoming you to today's webinar with the Dr. Jessica Metcalfe. We're very excited to have Dr. Metcalfe on with us today. She's got an excellent program for us. So let's just jump into this. As I said, my name is Effie Habsha. I am the founder of Women in Dentistry, and we began Women in Dentistry over 10 years ago. And the group was created in order to connect, empower, and educate all women in the dental field. And since then, we have grown exponentially, and we're very proud to be able to be here today in front of you, presenting, excellent webinars since the start of this pandemic. So thank you for joining us. Now, Women in Dentistry can be found, you can see us online at womensdentistry.com. Again, since the pandemic, we had launched into our webinar series. So under the event section on the website, you can see the upcoming webinars, and we plan to continue our webinar series as we, beyond the pandemic on a monthly basis. So stay tuned for that. We're really excited about it. And if you want to join our Women in Dentistry community, just hit the blue button on the screen there in the website under subscribe. You can also find us online on Facebook and on Instagram. And our handle is @Women's Dentistry. So please feel free to take out your phones right now, go to Women's Dentistry and follow us on Instagram. We're constantly disseminating information to the audience throughout the year, at least 3 or 4 posts per week and stories. So that's a great way for us to stay connected. And you can see we've advertised all the webinars on Instagram. So today's program is brought to you by Dr. Jessica Metcalfe, and I'll tell you a little bit about her and the topic in just a minute. But before we begin, I want to give you a few housekeeping items that we need to cover. So this webinar is recorded as a webinar format, which means that your microphones and your videos are turned off. However, there is, if you look at the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A function that you can certainly feel free to submit your questions throughout the presentation, and I will cover them. I'll ask Jessica of the questions at the end of her presentation. This is also, we found that our connection was a little bit choppy. I think it's okay now, but if you do find that you're having any troubles, please feel free to jot a few lines down either in the questions or in the chat area of the program. We always get questions about CE, so we will be offering CE for those of you who attend the entire session, and it's CE that you can submit to your AGD. Okay, I think that's all I need to cover from a housekeeping standpoint. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Jessica Metcalfe. Dr. Jessica Metcalfe is going to be talking to us about the imposter phenomenon. Water your own grass. And that's something that I've heard quite a bit about, and I think I suffer from it. So Jess, you'll tell me if I do later on in the program. But Dr. Metcalfe is a full-time staff dentist, education director, special project manager, and clinical investigator at Princess Margaret Cancer Center in the Department of Dental Oncology and Maxillofacial Prosthetics. She's an international lecturer on the topics of treating a cancer patient, and she has a special interest in head and neck cancer patients. She's also a part-time instructor at the University of Toronto Dental School. So with that, I'd like to welcome our very talented Dr. Metcalfe, and we'll see you after her presentation for our Q&A. Enjoy. Jess, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Okay, here we go. We're going to get this up. Okay, can everyone, how's that screen? Is it, you're just viewing the screen itself? Okay, let me try that again.
Just play your slideshow. Play the slideshow. And
so play from start? Would that just, because I'm set up with 2 screens, that's why. Do you see the slide or the presenter view?
Presenter view. If you wanted to just, I think you just had it a second ago. So maybe swap displays. Hit the swap display button. We can just see your screen that has a presenter. Okay, now if you go there and right at the bottom, there's that slide presentation mode on the other side, right? Like play the presentation. Bring your cursor down.
Play down, yep. Oh, past here?
And
I'm sorry, hold on. Let me stop share for a second, hold on. Stop share, let me do that again. We're gonna go desktop 2, we're gonna go share. We're gonna go this way, slideshow from current slide. And what do you guys see now?
We see your screensaver. This is just a little bit of technical fun that we're. we see gorgeous mountains and everywhere we can't be these days.
Yeah. Right. Here we go. One more time.
You guys see all the behind the scenes stuff that goes into putting on a webinar. It's not simple.
How's that?
Beautiful. You just press play presentation. You're in your presenter mode.
I'm still in the presenter mode.
Swap displays to top.
Yeah.
Top
swap
middle.
displays. Here we go.
Icon there for swap display.
Got it?
Yeah. Try that.
How are we now?
Again, Jessica? We see your presenter screen.
You still see the presenter screen. Okay, I'm gonna disconnect my.
Perfect. No. You're good.
You're good?
Good.
Jessica, you're good. You're good. Just advance one more slide and let me just confirm. So perfect. I'll give you the go ahead as you advance a slide. I think you can start going. You can start speaking. I'm going to turn off my video and audio and brilliant. Okay, guys, that was just that was deliberate. Okay, have fun. I'm looking forward to this. Bye.
Awesome. Okay, thanks guys so much. I do appreciate you. I'm not the greatest tech savvy person, and so thank you for joining this journey with me, because as you can see right now, I just had a little bit of an imposter feeling right there, thinking that I can't actually get this started. But it is because it's something new, but these skills are transferable, and that's what we're going to be looking at throughout today's entire presentation. And so to start, I want you to take a look at this mural that's on the screen right now. And you see the mural with something that's slightly different in the middle of that bear. And we can view it in two different ways. One is it something that's missing, or are we looking to something beyond? And that's the different viewpoints that we're going to be looking at today, or different mindsets. And so I like to have a disclaimer with all of my presentations, and today webinars are a slightly different way of interacting with people, which means that I will laugh at my jokes, but I actually don't know if you're laughing at it because I can't gauge your facial expressions. I usually walk up and down the aisles, but today we'll see what ends up happening in amongst the Q&A. I put on makeup today because you're really close to my face, but ultimately this disclaimer is for you to know that I have put this camera that is now moving around the screen, so then it's a reminder for you to either take notes down, screenshot, or pen to paper, so then you can then practice these exercises while you're at home, or take this information from here. So we already talked about who I am. Outside of Princess Margaret, I'm also involved in organized dentistry. So I'm on the executive committee for the York Regional Dental Society. I'm on the Education Advisory Committee for the Ontario Dental Association. And I'm on the Lifelong Learning Task Force for Canadian Dental Association. It's a lot of dentistry. And the reason why I'm sharing a bit more about me, because it's going to apply to later on in the presentation. Outside of dentistry, I like spending lots of time with my family and friends. I do jujitsu, yoga, I hike, I sail, I like to travel, I read a lot, but a part of me is also being anxious. So the agenda for today is, what is imposter phenomenon? Who does imposter phenomenon affect? How does imposter phenomenon affect you in dentistry or life? And then we'll talk about a few strategies that are take-home messages. So to start, you're going to take the next 90 seconds and you're going to complete the sentence, so fill in the blanks, 4 different times. So I am, and fill in the blanks. Actually, we'll give you a minute. So either take out a piece of paper and pen, open up your notes on your phone or a Word document if you're on your computer, and I want you to fill this in 4 different times. I'm going to slightly talk during it because I don't want it to come across as if I'm lagging or the screen is frozen, but don't think you're rushed. You've got about 45 seconds left. And if you can't think of 4, that's okay. If you think of more than 4, great. And now I'm going to share my responses. My responses are, I am smart, I am determined, I am a daughter, and I am a dentist. Now, you could have answered this in one of 2 ways. One, you either answered it all adjectives, or you would have answered it all in nouns. If you had answered it in an adjective format, that's the internal experience that you're having, so the feelings that you're experiencing. If you had answered them all as nouns, then that's the external factor that you're experiencing. So your resume or your CV, who you are. Now, the reason why I like this exercise is one of the first times that I had done this exercise, I was with a group of about 25 people, and I had to introduce my name and say my response to the person, and then they would then say the exact same thing or share with me their response. So I said, there's no way I'm going to share this one response. I can't believe I need to do this in person. But I decided, you know what, we're in this together and I'm going to do this. And I shared with this person, hi, I'm Jessica Metcalfe and I am scared. What I didn't know was how it was going to affect her. We continued on with the workshop, and at the end of the workshop, she ended up coming over to me afterwards, and she thanked me. She said, honestly, Jessica, I have such bad social anxiety, and one of the reasons why I wanted to try this workshop to get out and meet people. But what I didn't know that by me saying this, she actually stayed the full workshop because she thought she was going to have to leave because she didn't think her social anxiety was going to able to allow her to stay the full time. So what I want to get across to you is we're not alone in this. In 1978, Dr. Pauline Clance and Dr. Suzanne Imes studied over 150 high-achieving women. These were individuals with undergrad degrees, masters, PhDs, as well as any types of fields, so across the ranks. And what they noticed is that they couldn't internalize that experience of that sense of success. Thus, where imposters came from. What they accredited their accomplishments to was luck, misgrading, errors by others, or essentially their connections, so who they knew. So the definition that Clance and Imes came up with is that it's an internal experience of intellectual phoniness, which appears to be particularly prevalent and intense among a select sample of high-achieving women. More recently, in 2018, Haney et al. Described it as a professional paralysis secondary to perceived feelings of fraudulence. And so what it is you have these feelings of who you think they are, but they don't actually match who you are on your resume. Now, you could have heard the difference or different sayings of imposter syndrome, imposter experience, fraud syndrome, but the reason we don't call it a syndrome is because it hasn't been established in the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders. So when I reached out to Dr. Clance, she then gave me some more information and said, we will continue to call it imposter phenomenon. So that's what we're going to stick with today. The original data that came out in 1978, we knew it affects high-achieving women. With more research, we noticed with women and minority groups tend to be most affected. Then with the addition of more research, we noticed that really any high-achieving or functioning individual, which means anyone who's ambitious, determined, driven, passionate, in both life and career. A couple examples include one being Maya Angelou. She's a political rights activist, an actress, a screenwriter, an author, and a dancer. And yet, even after she had written 11 books, she said, I've written 11 books, but each time I think, uh-oh, they're gonna find me out and I run a game on everybody. So no matter what your experience is or how far into success you are, sometimes you can have these feelings of imposter. Another example is Albert Einstein. He said, "The exaggerated esteem in which my life work is held makes makes me feel very ill at ease. I feel compelled to think of myself as an involuntary swindler." Now, the person who developed the theory of relativity, if he feels like an involuntary swindler, then it's okay if we feel those feelings as well. Now, I want you to think, how do you know if you have imposter phenomenon? Ask yourself, do you ever feel like your accomplishments are because of luck, chance, appearance, or connection? Are you worried you're going to be exposed as a fraud? Do you think people around you are smarter, work harder, or do a better job than you? Do you find yourself terrified to make mistakes? Now, you may have answered yes to one of these questions, or you could have answered yes to all of them. But then you're thinking, it's because I set high standards. It makes me work harder. It motivates me. It keeps me humble. This is the myth of the imposter phenomenon. And so we have a current thought pattern where it's not that we never think we've never accomplished anything or amounted to everything. We have this external evidence that shows us that I've graduated from dental school, but I just don't believe it. So I know I have my DMD. I've gotten my license. I know I'm a dentist, but for some reason, this subtle feeling sneaks up on me and makes me think I'm gonna be found out. I don't deserve to be here, or I feel unworthy for some unspecified reason. And so the next exercise, and you don't have to do this right now, at some point over the next couple of days, and you can even do it today, I want you to sit across from your 20-year-old self. And what would they say? You can sit down, have a coffee with them, have a meal with them. And I know this sounds very interesting, but creating the physicality of putting that person into that seat allows you to see and then look back at how far you've come. So for me, I remember being 20 years old and thinking all I wanted to do was to get into dental school. I was taking the DAT, I was applying. Fast forward 7 years, I'm in 4th year dental school. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I have so many requirements in order to graduate. How am I going to treat patients when I leave here since I don't have someone to fall back on? What's going to be my next step? Did I take enough away from here? But then what I actually was asked to do is take part on the applicants' interviews. So people who were then applying to 1st year dental school. And by sitting on those interviews, it put things back into perspective, because 7 years ago, all I wanted to do so bad was to get into dental school. And that's what I want you to do, is I want you to put things back into perspective, okay? You don't have to be 20 years old. It can be 5 years, it can be 10 years, but I need you to look back at what that individual was thinking at that point in time and how far you've come. So, we've talked about what imposter phenomenon is. Now we need to look at where would these beliefs have come from. So there's the age-old question of nature versus nurture. So let's talk about family patterns and family dynamics. You may have been raised in an environment that valued intelligence. So the brain is something to be proud of, which means then you bring that forward through your childhood, into your life journey, and into today's adulthood. Just like if, let's say, you were raised to value the way you looked or who you married. That gets ingrained into us to a certain degree that even though we change our thought patterns on who we think we should marry or what we think we should look like or what our intelligence matters, when we get to that adulthood, there's still some underlying pattern that was given to us back from the beginning. The other side is that you may have had a troubled childhood. Now, we're not playing the blame game here today, okay? It's giving you the understanding on where you've come along your life journey to bring you to the thoughts that you're thinking right now. The other part of the beliefs is the social conditioning for women in society. We're taught to criticize ourselves. Even if we look back to when we're a little girl looking at a magazine, everything's photoshopped, right? So we're looking that we need to perceive or look a certain way. Women tend to think that they need to justify themselves. So what we do and why we do it. Women tend to frame suggestions as questions. So they're trying to gauge the room before they actually ask their question so that they don't come across as abrasive. Women tend to minimize their own ambitions. Now, the good thing is that we are more than happy to share our best friend's accomplishments, but we just won't accept or share our own to the fullest extent. Now, if we look at success and likability, there was a study that was completed out of Harvard where a class was split into two groups and they were given identical cases about a real life entrepreneur, so a successful venture capitalist. And what they described was, how did this individual become successful? And it was by using their network. Now, at the end of this case study, what they did was they asked questions about how they felt about the person's competency and personality. Now, both individuals were considered competent. Now, remember, this is an identical case. The only difference is that when the person was labeled Howard, they were considered more likable. When the person was considered a Heidi, they were actually considered selfish and not likable. So success and likability is positively correlated for men and yet negatively correlated for women. So that's why women tend to minimize their own ambitions. So before we've even started our race or left the start line, we're already doubting our capabilities, which deepens our sense of imposter phenomenon. The other aspect of it is going back to what we're told. So for instance, our appearance, what we should wear to be successful, the anti-aging creams, if we wear a certain makeup. But if we consider our appearance or think too much about appearance, then we're considered too vain. We're told we need to be smart and ambitious, and yet too much so, men won't want to date us. We're told to be bold and confident, and yet too much, we're considered shrill and aggressive. We're told stand up for yourself, and yet too much so, you're considered assertive and the B word. And this is our mind trap, which is defined as cognitive dissonance. It's the state of conflict in the mind where two opposing views are trying to occur at the exact same time. So an example of it is your expectations versus what you believe others expect of you. Or the standards that you set for yourself, but then how you go about assessing how you're doing. So the mind trap. We think we must perform to the highest standard. And yet when we try to acknowledge a new challenge or accept a new challenge, we motivate ourselves with such a negative internal voice that we have this cycle of fear of failing and self-doubt. So our expectation is that we need to be the best, do the best in order to succeed in all aspects of life. And yet, anytime we even succeed at something, we consider it a failure and that we're bound to be found out. This is exhausting, and we haven't even tried the challenge yet. So an example of this is moving the goalpost. And I tend to do this quite often. So we have Jessica here who sets a goal, and I know I'm going to achieve it. And I acknowledge that win because I'm so excited that I was able to achieve it. And yet I set that next goal, which most of us high achieving individuals do, and I get ready to accept that next goal, except I've already moved on to the next one, which means as I'm trying to then get to this next goal, I've already set the next one again. So I keep moving this goalpost to the point that it's so small that I forgot to look back and I've given up on the next one. This is when I feel like an imposter. This is when I have to take a minute, acknowledge where I've come and what I've done. What I've shown in this slide is that you're never starting on the bottom. You're always starting a little bit higher than where you did last time, which means you're never starting from scratch. It's not that you know nothing. You always have something to build off of. That is the biggest thing. Every skill that you develop, regardless of what you take on as a task or a challenge, is completely transferable. You just need to figure out how to use it. And so I'm going to go back. Before we move on, what I wanted to share with you is, up until a few years ago, if someone would come to me and say, "You're so smart," I would actually respond with, "I'm not really that smart. I just work really hard." And one of the reasons is, I'm going to share something with you now. In the middle of undergrad, I was diagnosed with a learning disability, specifically with reading comprehension. And so during that time, I had to learn how to learn all over again, which was fine. Looking back, I'm really glad it happened. But at the same time, I brought those feelings with me even after I graduated dental school. So I have all this knowledge, and yet for some reason, I don't consider it smart, even though I've worked that hard. And so a couple of years ago, I came across this quote: "If you knew how hard or how much hard work went into it, you wouldn't call it genius." And you know who said this? Michelangelo. Michelangelo, who's a sculptor, a painter, an architect, not the turtle. He created the Sistine Chapel, David. So why do we try to then hide these imposter feelings through other skills that we've tried to then build up? Now, I want you to take a minute, because this is going to be a little interesting to understand the first time that you hear this. I am not what I think I am. I am not what you think I am. I am what I think you think I am. And this is where that cognitive dissonance comes from. We're trying to figure out who we are in this world, or where we've come from, and trying to acknowledge our successes, and yet the expectation, or how we see we're assessing those expectations, don't coincide. So, to recap, what do we know? We're all high-achieving individuals. This is fantastic. Great. We also have self-doubt, and we self-critical think about ourselves, which leads to a problem with our psychological well-being, which increases stress and anxiety and can ultimately lead to burnout. And so where's the link between dentistry, imposter phenomenon, and burnout? In 1998, Henny et al. Looked into specifically pharmacy students, nursing students, medical and dental students, and a third of them scored as imposters. Now, imposter phenomenon is quite highly linked to feeling general psychological distress, so worry, stress, anxiety. In 2004, more research was done in regards to residents and fellows in the medical field, and they still noticed that it does affect females more than males. Now in 2016, bringing this even to more current times, Willick et al. Looked into the levels of imposter phenomenon and the link to burnout in medical students. And what they noticed is that there was significant associations. So if you were a female, you were more likely to associate with imposter phenomenon. And if you experienced imposter phenomenon feelings, you were more likely to experience burnout. Now, an example to show on when this normally happens is, for instance, a fourth-year student versus a first year. In first year, you're doing more didactic, or you're doing non-clinical dentistry. In comparison to when you get to fourth year, you're about to graduate, go into the real world, and you don't have the professors to run treatment plans by, or you don't have the professors to check your preps anymore. So this is where the imposter phenomenon can come from, is new triggers, transitions, achievements, and ultimately burnout can be shown in a couple of different forms. That includes fatigue, the inability to concentrate, insomnia, irritability, and feeling as if one is just going through the motions. So we need to figure out who are we, or what type of imposter, before we can then figure out and understand how to change that thought pattern. And so there's 5 different types of imposters. There's the perfectionist, the natural genius, the soloist, the expert, and the superwoman. So let's go through and dive into each imposter. The perfectionist primary focus is on how something is done, which means that you're striving for that 100%, but anything less than that is considered a failure. So even though you succeed 99 out of 100, you're only looking at that 1%. So the belief is you want something done right, you need to do it yourself, and it's hard to give up a bit of that control because you're looking for perfection. Now, the problem is that you might actually give up too quickly because you don't need that 100% right at the get-go. The natural genius's primary focus is on how and when accomplishments happen. So it means if it comes quite easily to you and you're able to pick it up quite fast, then you're okay to move on with it. But if you have to struggle at all to try a new skill or learn something new, you have this setback, and sometimes you actually avoid taking risks. The soloist's primary focus is on who completes the task. So you need to do it, and you alone. And if you ask for help, you consider it a sign of weakness. The expert is the knowledge version of perfectionist. So the primary focus is on what and how much you know or can do. Which means then you already think you need to know everything before you've actually learned the skill. But how are you supposed to get there if you don't actually pick up some information about it? So sometimes people can actually get hung up on this. So for instance, an example is, let's say you want to write an article for a journal for the first time. The problem is that you then get hung up on all the information that you need to do research for before you actually start writing. And sometimes you just need to get ready and get those ideas on paper. The superwoman. This is the perfectionist, but turbocharged. So the primary focus is on how many roles you can excel in. The difference between perfectionists and supers is that the perfectionist solely thinks that they need to be perfectionist at their careers, while the supers think it's all encompassing, so both life and career. So if you're a good partner, if you're the best colleague, if you're the best parent. But the problem is that we set such high, unrealistic standards in every aspect of our lives that we become overextended and that we're switched on all the time, which means when you have that downtime and it's ready to relax, you're unable to do so. Did you figure out which imposter you were? Could you relate to more than one? Why do we think we're unworthy of success? Now, 2 common problems that come with feeling like an imposter and being a high achieving individual is that we either overwork or we procrastinate. The overwork is where we drive for perfection to reach those lofty standards. So we put in so much effort. The procrastination aspect of it is where we are then paralyzed by self-doubt. Now, we've already talked about how great it is to be a high achiever, because at the end of the day, success follows no matter what. The problem then lies in the aftermath when we then are trying something new. We then think if we overworked, we're never going to be able to do this again, because how are we going to be able to sustain those levels of effort? The other is, if we've procrastinated, we then think, it was because of luck. It was a last minute effort. I winged it. Who am I? I consider myself in the imposter type of a superwoman. And yes, I feel like an imposter from time to time. So what happens to me? Well, we talked about moving the goalposts. That's one of my big ones that I know I do. So I know I always have to sit down and look back at what I've done and acknowledge it. I have a hard time just sitting and relaxing. It's really funny because when I was putting this presentation together, I was watching some TV, I was meditating, stuff that's a part of my daily regimen. And then I thought back to September when I had a lull in between a couple of my education events for discussing the cancer patient. And for some reason, I thought, even though I play piano and even though I'm busy right now, I'm going to pick up the violin because I had a 2-week lull period. I had gone out to do the work, looked at the music school, and then I had to take a second to sit back and think, okay, maybe not right now, maybe in the future, but maybe not right now. So let's enjoy and take a break. What I also do for me is I journal on a daily basis. Now, this was quite difficult to get into because originally when someone had recommended journaling and writing down gratitudes to help change that mindset, the problem is that I would think back to my 8-year-old self and think, dear diary, Jessica, this is what you did today. And that's not what journaling is. So what I started to do was write down the negative aspects in my life. But the problem with that is when I go back to go review, I only see the negative. So what now I do on a daily when I try to journal and jot those notes down is that if there were some negatives, that's fine, trying to figure out what I can learn from it, but also acknowledging and sharing with myself those positives. What we have to understand is that feelings are not facts. So even though we feel a little bit of discomfort, that's okay. This discomfort is there because you're slightly anxious, but it's not because you can't do something. It's the fear we have, the fear of the I can't or the fear of the unknown. So anxiety is a normal reaction. We're not trying to eliminate anxiety altogether. Just like right now before we loaded the webinar where I was struggling with the screen shares, a little bit of anxiety is okay because we know it's going to work out. The problem is when we have long-term anxiety. And so right now, you're going to shake off your old thoughts. I want you to take responsibility for getting where you are today. You're the one who signed up for this webinar. Never underestimate yourself. There's more than enough people out there to underestimate. There's no reason for you to underestimate yourself. Just because you don't know everything doesn't mean you know nothing. You don't need to be the best to give the best, and understand that everyone fails sometimes and it's okay. So let's talk a little bit about anxiety so we can understand what anxiety is and where it comes from. So anxiety is the culmination of both mind and body. It's worry, which is the cognitive component, and it's stress, which is the biological response. So it's your flight or fight response. Anxiety is when both come together, but a lot of worry and a lot of stress. Now, stress is the natural response to a physical threat, while anxiety is a response to a non-physical threat. And that's why we have stress as the fight or flight response. Back in the day, say as cave people, if we needed to try to get away from a tiger, that's why stress came in. But today, what we experience is slightly different. Now, anxiety goes off not when we are in danger, but when we think we're in danger. And so an example of that is like the smoke detector. A smoke detector will go off if there's a fire, but it'll also go off if you burnt toast because it's assessing that smoke. So a little bit of anxiety is okay. A lot of anxiety is bad. I totally went off a little track there, but there's a reason for it. So here's my segue. The brain can reorganize itself by forming new neural connections, and that's neuroplasticity. So the new thought is, I am not an imposter. And in order to change the feeling that you're having, we need to change the thought. Right now, we've created paths where we've hiked through. We've padded down that trail. There's footprints there. We can see it every single time we go into it. The problem is that in order to create that new path, in order to think that new thought, I am not an imposter, we have to start bushwhacking. We need to deviate from that path of imposter feelings and create that new path, which means it's going to be difficult. There's going to be a challenge. You're going to have to try to do it on a regular basis. So the harmful behavior that we experience as imposters, when we try something new, I don't really know what I'm doing. We get discomfort, anxiety, which is that increase of adrenaline and heart rate. You start to sweat. And even though I can't see anyone right now, I'm sweating here too. We have this creeping sense of dread. And that statement that comes out, or that thought, I'm an imposter. Self-doubt and fear and failure decide to rear their heads, and we create this negative self-talk. We drive for perfection. We overwork or avoid, but ultimately we succeed. Now, we discount that success, and it turns into a hamster wheel of every time we try something new, we tell ourselves, I don't really know what I'm doing. So how do we change that? We need to create mindful behaviors. And an example of that is the speaking or lecturing. I'm going to share with you my example. When I first started out, there would always be this reminder or this voice in my head saying, I don't know what I'm doing. I would get that uncomfortable feeling and that anxiety, which is increased heart rate, nausea or vomiting, and sweating. Back in undergrad, it actually used to be so bad. Prior to giving presentations, even a 5-minute presentation, I used to have to excuse myself to go vomit before I would go and present. I think I've come a long way since then, which is a great thing. Now, instead of that thought of, I'm an imposter, you question yourself. What happens if I mess up? What if I don't have the answers? I'm going to answer those. I've prepared, I know I have, which means if I make a mistake, it's okay, I'll correct myself and I'll keep going. Or someone will correct and I try to figure out where I went wrong. If I don't have an answer, that's okay. I can always take your information and try to get that answer to you afterwards. So now I have created a negative feedback loop that gives me a positive self-talk in order to help me understand and accept my success this time. So now I've learned from my challenges, I have this increased sense of satisfaction, and I increase my self-esteem. So when I try something new, I understand that that discomfort or that butterfly feeling that I have is also excitement as well. That way, I know I'm willing to try that new challenge. The next exercise that I want us to take part in, and you don't have to do this right now, you can reach out to me afterwards to get a little bit more information about this, is the thought ladder exercise. And the purpose is we want to get to this goal thought. So over time, we're changing our thoughts to be helpful for us and empowering. That way we reduce our stress, our worry, our anxiety, and ultimately prevent burnout. We start at the bottom of the ladder and we write that initial thought. It's what you're thinking right now. There are probably a lot of thoughts going through your head. You need to narrow it down. You can do as many thought ladders as you want, but a single thought at a time, okay? What thoughts are happening right now? Remind me of if you turn your back to a pediatric patient and next thing you know, you turn back around and they've got the air water syringe. The goal thought is the want or the desire, where you're going to get to. It's what you don't feel right now, and that's okay. In between that, we're going to create rungs of the ladder. So 2 to 3 neutral thoughts. That's your step 3. A neutral thought is a step up. It's a non-threatening thought. It may be positive or it might not be positive, but it's not negative. You need to figure out if you believe it. So if you go from a 4 out of 10 to a 6 out of 10, then you feel that much better. You're not going to go from a 1 to a 10 out of 10 all at once. That's why we have to climb this ladder. So an example we're going to talk about, something that's very tangible, so then you can take home and apply. The initial thought is, I suck at dentures. Let's say you wanted to try doing something new, like restoring implant retained dentures. Great, okay? Our goal thought is, I'm gonna be great at dentures. How do you get from your initial thought to your goal thought? I have an education. I'm not starting from zero. Maybe you'll take continuing education, something that's more specific, but it's a tangible goal. I know I then will feed back to me that I have some more information, or I'll do research on my own, but I'm going to get there and inform myself. Unless you've just graduated, you've definitely, well, even if you have graduated, you've done dentures in school. So repeat back to yourself how many you've done. If you can't count them, that's okay, but you know you've done. And even though they weren't implant retained dentures, you've done dentures and they've been successful. Then that's when you can acknowledge your goal thought. But it has to be step by step in order to get there. Step 4 goes back to our neuroplasticity. And that's why we kind of veered a little bit talking about anxiety. Practicing every day is extremely important. It's not going to happen overnight. You're going to fumble, and that's okay. But by doing a little bit each day, if that means that you wrote down your thought ladder and then you decided to repeat it to yourself once a day, twice a day, once every couple of days, that's completely fine. It's doing it in such a way that you're building brick by brick. Rome wasn't built in a day, and you're not going to change your thoughts of imposters overnight. The brain creates this bias when we are given a new challenge. We overestimate what needs to be done in order to be successful, and we underestimate, so we devalue the consistency of small daily practice. Now, for me, changing my thought pattern didn't happen overnight, and I didn't leave school or stop working or stop talking to family and go on this eat, pray, love adventure for 6 months straight. No, I practiced a little bit each day. Just like this puzzle. I actually did this over the course of 4 weeks. I didn't start from the first picture and ended up in the second picture. There was all these steps that were in between. Now, you may be thinking, okay, well, I could do this, I could try it, but who knows, maybe it will work or it won't work. Non-doing is a form of doing. So an example of that is Winnie the Pooh decides to go visit one of his friends, but he couldn't figure out who he wanted to go and visit. So he went out on his tree stump, sat there with his tub of honey, and he ate his honey. Piglet then walked by, and he then started speaking with Piglet. So Piglet ended up speaking to him, but this is still a form of doing because he chose not to decide. This was positive for Winnie the Pooh because he got to go outside and he got to go eat honey. The negative is when we look at that path that we've already created of the imposter phenomenon feelings. That path right now has been pushed down, stepped on. We don't want to pave that path. That's harder to pick up and harder to start bushwhacking a new path. So, what I want you to do as a last exercise that I'm giving you for today is my achievements. I want you to write down a list, and you're going to start this today. Anything big or small that comes to mind, you're going to write it down. You can write down that you're a dentist, a yogi, really great yoga pose that you do, if you tried to bake recently, or you look back at a time that you were traveling and you stumbled upon this restaurant and you know that you trusted your gut, that you're an adventurer, if you put on pants in the morning, you can write down whatever you want on that achievement list. A week later, in a week, don't do this in a day, you're going to do it in a week, because depending on the emotion that you're feeling at that point in time, that's what you'll put on the list. But we experience all different types of emotions throughout the entire week. So that's why I want this exercise to be done over the timeline of 1 week. You're then going to read it out loud. You're going to sit down, and if your 20-year-old self is sitting across from you, they're sitting across from you. And you're going to read it out loud. The reason why you have to read it out loud is because when you use more than one sense, you acknowledge it more. You see it, you hear it, you read it, you understand it. Then I want you to imagine, what if someone else had done all these things? What would you think of them as a person? What's your 20-year-old self looking back at you and saying? I want you to leave here today believing in yourself so much that there is no room for self-doubt. So that when you do start thinking that the grass is greener on the other side, you stop looking over the fence and you water your own grass. So thank you so much for having me today. If there's questions, I didn't actually look up to see the questions. I just launched my website yesterday, drjessicametcalfe.com. You can find me on Instagram. And lastly, I will be hosting a workshop starting June 14th. If you're interested, check it out on my website. And that's it.
Excellent, Jessica. Thank you so much. I guess we can stop screen share and we'll just get to some of the questions here.
Sure.
So I don't know about you guys, but so much of what you said resonated with me, I'll have to say. I mean, so much of what I've achieved, I feel like I just kind of lucked into it. It's my sunny disposition, you know, I'm not really who I am. So it's really nice to, and you know, to know that we're not alone. And I think that's one of the nice things that we'd like to offer through Women in Dentistry is these topics that really haven't been talked about that much, you know, whether it's this topic, mindfulness. And I think that's what makes us unique and makes the experience so much better. So thank you so much for your, honestly, your insight and your expertise. And we had some really great questions here that I'd like to share with you. The first one being, hold on, I can't find my Q&A section. Hold on, let's see if, now I'm going through some anxiety here trying to find, okay, here we are.
It's okay.
That was deliberate to show you that I, you know, feel the same. Okay. So one question that we had here is almost like a catch-22. So the question is it like a catch-22? Like, would you say that, can you be successful without having that imposter syndrome? Like, do people kind of, can you have one without the other? I mean, is it?
Yeah, so catch-22 goes hand in hand with hindsight's always 20/20, right? We could have always done things differently now looking back, right?
Right.
You can totally be successful without having these imposter phenomenon feelings. And today I specifically linked it to women, but that percentage associated with men, they actually experience it slightly different. So for us, we'll throw ourselves into the work to try to over prepare and make sure we have all the answers to the questions. Men actually tend to avoid, and they won't hit it head on, so that not to be thought that they're an imposter. So we all feel them, and as genders, we experience them slightly different.
Okay, thank you. That answered that. Another question is, and I think you did actually cover it, but I think it'd be interesting to hear it again, the difference between imposter phenomena and perfectionism. You know, sometimes you avoid tasks because you feel you won't be perfect. I know you covered that in your talk, but do you want to comment on that again, Jessica?
Sure. So the perfectionism or perfection mindset is that we have to always get 100%. So an example of this is when I was putting this presentation together, I had this outline of how I saw it, and I actually kept putting it off, even though I had it streamlined across my whiteboard and trying to figure out what I needed to do. But I couldn't jump into putting my slides together because I was like, I don't have enough information. All this work this last year that I've put information together and developed this perfectionism, I think that this slide's going to be wrong. Who's going to believe that then if it's coming from me? Right? So we each have, or we define perfectionism slightly different based on the challenges and who we are as an individual. But it's almost trying to kind of nip it in the bud, and by putting out the information, someone's going to agree with it. And the great thing about it is you can always change things, right? It's not that you can't change things. So even if you want to put it out and it works out and you think it's, okay, this is top notch, but then there's always going to be someone who has something to say about something as well, right? There's going to be criticizing. It's going to be trying to figure out, okay, how do I improve this? Because goals change, information changes, research is always updating.
Right. Okay. Okay, we've got a lot of interest here. People are very interested in this talk, and I think there's a lot of people contacting you. In the interest of time, we'll just cover one more of the questions. And this one has to do with, and again, you may have touched upon it, but how you deal with it. So mechanisms or methods to deal with failure, the feeling of, I guess, not achieving what you want to do. I know you covered it, but maybe you can give us something to take on, to leave us on a positive end during this time where we have so much time.
Right. So my biggest thing with the failure aspect is you can think that. It's completely fine. It's trying not to dwell on it. So let's say I took on a complicated extraction and it turned out to be way harder than I anticipated. And because of that, it took me longer. It turned surgical. I had to explain to the patient what was going on a little bit more or why it was taking that much longer. Now, I finished the procedure, patient's fine, I send them home. I sit back in my office, and it may not be at that moment in time because you're seeing a whole bunch of other patients, but at that end of that day, I'm going to be mindful, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to look at the radiograph as well, and I'm going to be like, okay, is there something that I missed? But I had planned this out. Okay, so it's not something that I missed. Fine. Did I look at the steps in a certain way, or was there something as an outlier? An example of this is, I can't remember who did this, who had looked at this individual in particular, but this woman who was working in her lab noticed that she kept having false outcomes, or the research that she was doing kept having really bad outcomes. And so she blamed it on herself, thinking that, oh my goodness, it's what I did. I didn't do enough research for the methods. So what she did was she actually installed a camera to look at what was happening, because what she needed to research needed to be left overnight. And what she noticed was there was actually mechanical failure that was happening in the middle of the night. So it's not just you. Right? So trying to take that step back, because unfortunately, when we're stuck in that mindset of fear of failing, or we have failed, we can't separate ourselves out from the facts, because all we can feel is that negative emotion.
Right. And I know for me, it's like so basically what you're saying is to think back and reflect.
Yes.
And I know for myself, if I have one patient that is less than pleased with the outcome or whatever, I will just dwell on that and say, oh my God, I must suck. But I don't remember the 1,000 other patients that had a positive experience. So that one bad review, you tend to forget all the others. I think just ground yourself, come back to your, remember your positives, and then maybe you won't feel like so much of a fraud or a failure.
So two aspects as take homes. One, writing down your thoughts I feel like is extremely important, because what you're feeling at that moment in time is also not what you felt before the experience, and even an hour or 2 hours later. The second is that we're not alone in this. So reaching out to others may not be at that moment in time because you don't feel great, but reaching out to others and asking them, reaching out to mentors, to peers. Everyone so far into her career had already written 11 books and still felt like an imposter. So we know we're not alone in this, but dentistry in and of itself can be very isolating. So leaning on our peers is so important.
Especially today, right?
Especially today. Oh my goodness, especially today.
So reach out to people, check in on people, because it'll make you feel better and it'll make them feel better. Jessica, thank you so much for your talk. I want to end up with saying that we will hear more from you for sure. I already talked to you about our journal, if you can contribute something to that. So look at me, always plugging and asking, setting that new goal, right? Yeah. So I want to bring everyone's attention, please. Again, we really appreciate your talk. Our talk next week is on COVID-19 strategies for nourishing relationships. So this is going to be given by a really successful and talented hygienist named Kathleen. She will present something that's, you know, important for the entire team on how to get back to work, how to nurture those relationships between you and your staff, as well as you and your patients. So how to kind of hit the ground running when our restrictions are finally lifted. And with that, I really thank you guys for your support for Women in Dentistry, for the group in itself, and I encourage you to stay connected, keep in touch with us, and we're constantly striving to give you wonderful talks like you heard today from Jessica. So again, thank you so much for your attention, and we'll see you next week. Take care, guys.
Bye, guys. Thank you so much.
Bye.